The sacred world of Mythal Prime had known visitors for longer than most. Species had known fire, pilgrims came. From every corner of the galaxy, they came in ships of crystal and ships of living metal. They came alone and they came in great fleets. They all came for the same reason. They came to stand before the temple of Vithora and wonder at its mysteries. The temple was older than memory. Its walls were made of a material that no scanner could identify. Its towers reached into the purple sky, like fingers grasping at heaven, and at its heart stood the gates. The great gates of Vithora had remained sealed for 4.7 million years. Every species in the galactic conquered had tried to open them. Every species had failed. The inscriptions on the gates spoke of the returners. They spoke of beings who would one day walk through the sacred threshold and claim the inheritance of the architects. The architects were the ancient ones. They had seeded life across the galaxy in the time before time. They had built the temple. They had sealed the gates, and then they had vanished into the darkness between stars. Hyperlet Moroth stood on the viewing platform above the temple courtyard. His scales were the deep blue of the Corvithi priesthood. His robes were white with silver thread. He had devoted his life to studying the gates. He had spent 300 years learning their secrets. He had learned nothing. Another group approaches, said his assistant, a young priest named VTH from the Conquered Survey Division. Morith did not look up from his meditations. Let them look, let them wonder. The gates will not open for scientists any more than they opened for warriors or mystics. They are humans, VTH said quietly. Now Morith looked up. Humans were new to the galactic community. They had only achieved faster than light travel a mere century ago. They were curious creatures, too curious. Some said they asked questions that other species knew better than to ask. They touched things that other species knew better than to touch. Humans, Moroth repeated. What could humans possibly hope to learn here that we have not already discovered? Down in the courtyard a small shuttle was landing on the ancient stones. It was a plain vessel, functional, the kind of ship that working people used for working purposes. The hatch opened and four figures stepped out into the purple light of Mythal Prime. Dr. Elelina Vasquez was the first to set foot on the sacred ground. She was a xenorchaeologist. She had spent her career studying the remnants of dead civilizations. Temple of Vithora was the greatest archaeological site in the known galaxy. She had waited 15 years for permission to visit. Behind her came Marcus Chan. He was an engineer. He carried scanning equipment and recording devices. He was already looking at the temple walls with professional interests. He was already thinking about how they were built. Corporal Yuki Tanaka came next. She was their security officer. Her job was to keep the scientists alive long enough to complete their work. She scanned the courtyard with careful eyes. She noted the positions of the Corvithi guards. She noted the exits. Last came Dr. Obi Adame. He was a linguist. He specialized in dead languages and forgotten scripts. The inscriptions on the temple walls had been translated 1,000 times by 1,000 scholars, but Obi believed there was always more to learn. There was always something that others had missed. It's bigger than the hollow showed. Elelina said. She was staring at the temple with wonder in her eyes. Much bigger. The architects like to build on a grand scale, Obi observed. Compensation for something, perhaps. Marcus laughed. Yuki did not. She was watching the Corvi priests on the viewing platform. They were watching her team with expressions that she did not like. Let's stay focused, Yuki said. We have 3 days to complete our survey. Concord was very specific about that. 3 days to study a building that others have studied for millions of years. Alina said. No pressure. They walked across the courtyard toward the temple entrance. Other pilgrims moved aside to let them pass. Some looked at them with curiosity. Humans were still a novelty in most parts of the galaxy. Others looked at them with something closer to contempt. The sacred places of the Concord were not for newcomers. The entrance to the temple was a great archway carved with symbols and images. Alina paused to study them. She saw figures that might have been the architects. They were tall and slender, with elongated heads. They were reaching towards something in the distance, something that was not shown. The same imagery appears in architect sites across the galaxy, Obi said. Reaching figures, the distant goal. No one knows what it means. Maybe they were just stretching, Marcus suggested. Long trip across the galaxy, stiff muscles. Obi gave him a look that said he was not amused. Marcus grinned and walked on. The interior of the temple was vast and dark and silent. Great columns rose into shadows overhead. The floor was smooth beneath their feet. Soft light came from nowhere and everywhere. It was warm light, welcoming light, the kind of light that made you want to explore. They walked deeper into the temple. They passed chambers filled with offerings from 1,000 worlds. They passed halls where pilgrims knelt in meditation. They passed galleries where priests stood guard over relics that no one understood. And then they came to the gates. The gates of Vithara were 30 m tall. They were made of the same strain material as the temple walls. They were covered with inscriptions in a language that had been dead for millions of years. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. They had not moved in for 7 million years. Alina stopped walking. She stood very still and stared at the gates. She had seen images of them 1,000 times. She had read every study and every theory, but seeing them in person was different. Seeing them in person made her heart beat faster. The inscriptions speak of the returners. Obi said he was already studying the carvings with intense focus. Beings who will one day prove themselves worthy of the architect's inheritance. Every species in the Concord has performed rituals here. Every species has tried to prove their worth. None have succeeded. What kind of rituals? Marcus asked. All kinds. Prayers, sacrifices, demonstrations of technological advancement, demonstrations of spiritual enlightenment. The Corvathi have been performing daily ceremonies for 300,000 years. That's commitment, Marcus said. That's faith, Obi corrected. Alina walked closer to the gates. She was not thinking about faith or rituals. She was thinking about archaeology. She was thinking about the people who had built this place. What had they wanted? What had they hoped for? Why had they sealed these gates and left them sealed for millions of years? There's a sensor ray here, Marcus said. He was scanning the wall beside the gates. Very sophisticated, very old. It's still active. What does it do? Yuki asked. I don't know. It's scanning something, waiting for something. Alina reached out her hand. She wanted to touch the gates. She wanted to feel the material beneath her fingers. She wanted to know what it felt like to touch something that old, something that mysterious. Her fingers touched the surface of the gates. The gates began to glow. Elena jumped back. Marcus dropped his scanner. Yuki drew her weapon. Obi simply stared with his mouth open. The glow spread across the surface of the gates. It was golden light, warm light. The same light that filled the temple. But brighter now, much brighter. The inscriptions began to shine like fire. The symbols began to move. They twisted and flowed across the surface of the gates like living things. And then the gates began to open. The sound was like thunder. It was like the heartbeat of a planet. It was a sound that the temple had not heard in for 7 million years. The great doors swung inward on hinges that should have been frozen solid with age. They moved smoothly, easily, as if they had been waiting for this moment. Elena stood frozen. She could not move. She could not speak. She could only watch as the gates opened before her. Beyond the gates was darkness, vast and waiting darkness. But within that darkness, lights were beginning to flicker. Machines were beginning to wake. Something was coming alive. What did you do? Marcus whispered. I don't know. Elena whispered back. I just touched them. Hypet was running down from the viewing platform. His robes were flying behind him. His face was twisted with emotion. It might have been joy. It might have been terror. It might have been both. The gates, he was screaming. The gates have opened. The returners have come. But Anna was not a returner. She was just a scientist. She was just a human who had touched a door because she was curious about what was on the other side. Yuki was speaking into her communicator. She was calling for backup. She was calling for instructions. No one was answering. The communications were filled with chaos. Every channel was screaming about the gates. We should go through, Elena said suddenly. What? Yuki stared at her. Are you insane? The gates are open. They might close again. We might never get another chance. This is not in our mission parameters, Yuki. This is the greatest archaeological discovery in the history of the galaxy. We have to go through. Marcus was already picking up his scanner. Obi was already walking toward the open gates. Yuki looked at them all with the expression of a soldier who knew she was about to do something very stupid. Fine, she said, but stay behind me. They walked through the gates of Vithora. They walked into the darkness beyond. They walk. The darkness beyond the gates was not empty. It was full of sleeping things, machines that had waited in silence for millions of years, systems that had dreamed of the day when someone would wake them. The humans walked through this darkness with their flashlights cutting thin beams through the black. They did not know that they were walking through tomb that was about to become a cradle. Elena led the way. Her heart was pounding, but her steps were steady. She had explored ancient ruins on a dozen worlds. She had walked through places where no living being had set foot in centuries, but this was different. This was older. This was more. The corridors stretched before them. The walls were smooth and dark. The ceiling was lost somewhere in the shadows above. Their footsteps echoed in the silence. It was a patient silence, a waiting silence, the kind of silence that expects to be broken. There's power in these walls. Marcus said. He was studying his scanner with growing excitement. Incredible power. The readings are off the scale. What kind of power? Yuki asked. Her weapon was still in her hand. Her eyes were still watching the shadows. I don't No, nothing like our systems, nothing like anything I've seen before. They walked on. The corridor began to curve. The walls began to change. Images appeared in the smooth surface. They glowed with soft golden light. They showed figures moving through vast spaces, building great cities, reaching toward distant stars. The architects Obi breathed. These are images of the architects themselves. Elena stopped to study one of the images. It showed a tall, slender figure standing before what looked like a control panel. The figure's hands were touching the panel with gentle precision. Its face was turned towards something outside the frame, something that made its expression seem almost sad. They look lonely, Elena said quietly. What? Marcus looked at her. In all these images they look lonely, even when there are many of them together. There's something sad in the way they hold themselves. Obi nodded. Slowly, many scholars have noted this. The architects seem to carry a great weight, a great sorrow. No one knows why. They continued walking. The corridor opened into a chamber, a vast chamber that took Elena's breath away. The chamber of echoes, that was what the ancient texts called it. Elena had read about it in fragments and rumors. Most scholars believed it was a myth, but here it was, real, waiting, alive. The chamber was circular. Its walls rose up and up until they merged with a ceiling that looked like the night sky. Stars glittered there, galaxies spiraled in slow motion. It was beautiful. It was overwhelming. It was too much to take in all at once. In the center of the chamber stood a platform. On the platform was a console. Around the console floated holographic projections of star maps and data streams. The projections had been frozen for millions of years. Now they were moving again. Now they were waking up. My God, Marcus whispered, do you have any idea what this technology is worth? It's not about worth, Elena said. It's about understanding. She walked toward the platform. The star maps parted to let her pass. They seemed to recognize her. They seemed to welcome her. She climbed the steps to the console and looked down at its surface. The console was covered with symbols, the same symbols that covered the gates, the same symbols that covered the temple walls. But here they were arranged in patterns that made something click in Ob's mind. It's a language, he said. He had climbed up beside Elena. He was staring at the symbols with tears in his eyes. A living language. It changes, it adapts. It's been waiting to be read. Can you read it? Elena asked. I think so, some of it. The structure is similar to other architect texts, but more complex, more alive. He reached out and touched one of the symbols. The console responded. A holographic image appeared in the air. Above them, it was the figure from the corridor, the sad figure with the gentle hands, but now it was speaking. The voice that came from the figure was like music. It was like water flowing over stones. It was like wind through leaves. It was a voice that had not been heard for 7 million years. Obi listened. His face grew pale. His hands began to shake. What is it saying? Elena demanded. Obi, what is it saying? It's calling us the young ones, Obi said. His voice was barely a whisper. The final planting, the hope they left behind. It's saying that we are the ones. They were waiting for us. Marcus laughed nervously. That's impossible. We're just humans. We only figured out space travel 100 red years ago. The message is clear, Obi said. We are the heirs of the architects. We are the returners. Elena felt the world spin around her. This could not be right. This could not be real. Humans were newcomers to the galaxy. They were barely tolerated by the older species. They were certainly not the chosen inheritors of an ancient and powerful civilization. There must be a mistake, she said, but the holographic figure was still speaking. And as Obi translated, the truth became harder and harder to deny. The architect seeded life across the galaxy. Obi said they planted the seeds of intelligence on 1,000 worlds, but they knew that not all seeds would grow the same way. Some would become strong too quickly. They would burn bright and fade. Others would grow slowly. They would develop depth before they developed power. The architects wanted the slow growers, the patient ones, the ones who would learn wonder before they learned to conquer. And they think that's us, Yuki asked. She had lowered her weapon. She was staring at the holographic figure with an expression that might have been all. The gates were keyed to a specific genetic signature. Obi continued, a signature that would only develop in a species that had faced enough hardship to become resilient, enough struggle to become strong, but not so much that they lost their sense of wonder, their curiosity, their desire to reach out and touch what they did not understand. Elelina thought about human history. She thought about the wars and the famines, the plagues and the disasters, the long climb from caves to stars. It had been hard, so hard, but they had never stopped being curious. They had never stopped asking questions. They had never stopped reaching for the next horizon. We didn't prove ourselves worthy, she said slowly. We just happened to be what they were looking for by accident, by chance, maybe. Chance is what they were looking for. Obi said, maybe they wanted someone who would walk through the gates, not because they thought they deserved to, but because they were simply curious about what was on the other side. Outside the temple, chaos was spreading. The news had reached every corner of the conquered. The gates of Thora had opened. Humans had walked through. The returners had come, but they were not the divine beings that the legends had promised. They were small and fragile and barely 100 years removed from their first steps into space. The Korvathi priesthood was in uproar. Hypet Moreth was on his knees in the courtyard, praying for guidance. Some of his priests believed that this was a miracle. Others believed it was a blasphemy. All of them believed that something terrible was about to happen. Ships were gathering in orbit above Mythal Prime, warships from a dozen species, religious vessels from a 100 sects, news ships from every network in the galaxy. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Everyone wanted to be there when history changed. In the Chamber of Echoes, the humans were still learning. The holographic figure was showing them more and more of the architect's history, their rise, their discoveries, their great works, and their slow, sad decline. They were dying, Obi said. His voice was heavy with sorrow. Their species was fading. They did not know why. Some kind of genetic entropy, some kind of cosmic inevitability. They knew they could not save themselves, so they tried to save their legacy, the temple, Elelina said. The gates, the inheritance, all of it. All of it was designed to be found, to be claimed by someone who would carry on their work, their dreams, their hope for the future. Marcus was working at one of the secondary consoles. His face was lit by the glow of scrolling data. There's so much here, he said. Technology, science, history, art, everything they were, everything they knew. It's all here waiting to be used, but why us? Yuki asked. Of all the species in the galaxy, all the civilizations that have tried to open those gates, why did they choose humans? The holographic figure seemed to hear her question. It turned toward her, its sad eyes looked into hers, and then it spoke again. B. Translated, because you are what we were. Before we forgot how to wonder, before we learned to fear what we did not understand. You are young, you are wild. You are full of questions, that is why we chose you, that is why we waited for you. For 4.7 million years, we waited for someone who would touch the gates. Not with reverence or fear, but with simple, beautiful, terrifying curiosity. Alina felt something shift inside her. Something fundamental, something that would never shift back. She was not a chosen one. She was not special. She was just a scientist who had touched a door because she wanted to know what was behind it, but maybe that was exactly what being chosen meant. Maybe it had never been about destiny. Maybe it had always been about attitude. Behind her, through the open gates, she could hear voices, angry voices, frightened voices. The galaxy was coming to see what the humans had found. The galaxy was coming to decide what should be done about it. Alina squared her shoulders. She looked at her team, Marcus with his scanner, Obi with his translations, Yuki with her. Steady skies above Mythal Prime had never been so crowded. Ships of every shape and size filled the orbital lanes. They jostled for position like fish, fighting for scraps. Some were sleek warships with weapons that could crack a planet. Others were ancient pilgrimage vessels that had been making this journey for centuries. All of them were watching, all of them were waiting. In the great courtyard of the Temple of Vithora, delegations were gathering. They had come from every corner of the galactic conquered. They had come to see the humans who had opened the gates. They had come to decide what should be done. High Prelate Moroth stood on the steps of the temple. His blue scales had lost their shine. His white robes were stained with dust. He had not slept since the gates opened. He had not stopped praying, but the gods had not answered. Beside him stood other prelates, other priests, representatives of the Korvathi faith that had guarded this temple for 300,000 years. They were frightened and confused. The legends had promised divine beings. The legends had promised salvation. Instead, they had received retired scientists with scanning equipment. This is blasphemy, shuddered a voice from the crowd. It was High Commander Voss, the leader of the Korvathi military forces. He was a massive figure covered in ceremonial armor. His scales were black as space. His eyes were filled with fury. The gates were meant for the worthy, not for these animals. A murmur of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd, but other voices rose in opposition. The gates chose them, shouted a priest from a different order. We saw it with our own eyes. The sensors activated, the doors opened. This is the prophecy fulfilled. The prophecy spoke of divine beings, not primitives. Perhaps divinity is not what we thought it was. Ambassador Trell of the Velith Collective moved through the crowd with the smooth grace of our species. The Velith were tall and thin with silver skin that reflected the light. They were known throughout the galaxy for their scientific achievements. They were also known for their cold practicality. This debate is pointless, Trell said. Her voice was like ice crystals falling on glass. What matters is not theology. What matters is what the humans have. found what matters is who controls what. Lies beyond those gates, the temple is sacred ground, Moreth protested. It cannot be claimed by any single power. The temple has been sacred ground for millions of years, but no one has ever been inside. Now someone is, and that changes everything. More delegations were arriving. The consortium of free traders sent representatives in shimmering robes of living silk, martial clans of Corinth warriors in powered armor that hummed with barely contained violence. The philosophical union sent scholars who looked at everything with detached curiosity, and through it all the human survey team remained inside the temple. They remained in the chamber of echoes. They remained with the technology and the knowledge that every species in the galaxy suddenly wanted. Alina stood before the holographic star maps and tried to think. She could hear the voices outside. She could hear the anger and the fear. She knew that her team was at the center of something much larger than themselves, something that could change the balance of power across the entire galaxy. We need to talk to them, she said. Finally, we need to explain what we found. Explain what? Marcus asked. That the architects left everything to us, that we're the chosen ones. They'll never accept that. Then we don't tell them that part. We tell them what this place actually is. Library, a gift, knowledge that belongs to everyone. Obi shook his head slowly. You don't understand the religious significance of what has happened. For millions of years, species have dreamed of being the returners. Entire civilizations have been built around the hope of claiming the architect's inheritance. If we tell them that the choosing was random, that it was just genetics and luck, it will destroy them. Better destroyed by truth than by lies. Yuki said she was checking her weapon for the 100th time, and better clears throat. We control the message. Then let them make up their own stories. Elelina nodded. She walked to a console and began working the controls. The technology responded to her touch as if it had been designed for her hands. Maybe it had. Maybe the architects had known exactly what their heirs would be. Like, I'm going to broadcast to the courtyard, she said. Everyone needs to hear this. Alina, wait, Obi began, but she had already activated the system. Her face appeared on holographic screens throughout the courtyard. Her voice echoed from speakers that had been silent for millions of years. The crowd fell silent. Every eye turned to look at her. My name is Dr. Alina Vasquez, she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. I am a xenorchiologist with the Concord Survey Division. My team and I came to Mythal Prime to study the temple. We did not come to fulfill any prophecy. We did not come to claim any inheritance. We came because we were curious. The silence in the courtyard deepened. Elelina could see High Commander Voss pushing toward the front of the crowd. She could see his hand moving toward his weapon. The gates of Vithora did not open for us because we were worthy, Alina continued. They opened for us because of an accident of evolution. The sensors were keyed to a specific genetic pattern, a pattern that humans happen to match, not because we are special, not because we are divine, but because of chance, nothing more. Now the crowd was stirring. She could hear voices rising in protest. She could hear the word blasphemy being shouted again and again. But here is what I want you to understand, Alina said. She raised her voice above the noise. What lies Beyond these gates is not a weapon, it is not a source of power, it is not a throne for conquering species, it is a library, a collection of knowledge. Everything the architects knew, everything they learned, everything they dreamed, and they left it here not to be hoarded by one species, they left it here to be shared. Ambassador Trell stepped forward. Her silver face was unreadable, and who decides how this knowledge is shared, who controls access? No one. Elelina said that's the point. The architects didn't want heirs who would claim this place as their own. They wanted friends, they wanted conversation, they wanted the knowledge to flow freely to everyone who wanted to learn. A convenient philosophy, Trell said, coming from the species that currently stands inside the one place everyone else wants to enter. Elena was about to respond when High Commander Voss finally reached the front of the crowd. He pointed a massive claw at the holographic image of Elena's face. Enough talk, he roared. These humans have violated the most sacred place in the galaxy. They have touched what should not be touched. They have claimed what cannot be claimed. They must be removed. They must be punished. The purity of the temple must be restored. Cheers erupted from parts of the crowd. Other voices rose in opposition. Arguments broke out between delegations. Weapons began to appear. The situation was spinning out of control. Elena watched it all from her screen in the Chamber of Echoes. She saw the hatred in some faces, the fear in others, the greed in still others. She understood what was about to happen. Galaxy was about to go to war over a door that she had touched without thinking. Yuki, she said quietly, can we hold this position? Yuki looked round the chamber. She calculated lines of fire and defensive points. She counted the ammunition in her weapon and the power in her backup batteries. For a while she said, not forever. Then we need to do something that changes the game. Like what? Elena turned to look at the vast star maps floating around them. She looked at the streams of data flowing through the consoles. She looked at everything the architects had left behind, like opening the second gate. She said. Obi stepped forward. His face was pale but determined. The inscription spoke of inner chambers, deeper levels. The Chamber of Echoes is just the beginning. There is more, much more. If we go deeper, we cut ourselves off from any chance of escape. Yuki warned. If we stay here, we die anyway. At least if we go deeper, we might find something that can change this situation. Outside, the arguments had turned to violence. A Corvithi warrior struck a Velith diplomat. A traitor drew a weapon and fired at a Marshall clan soldier. The courtyard erupted into chaos. High Prelate Mareth tried to restore order. He raised his voice in prayer. He called for peace and understanding. No one was listening. The sacred ground of Mythal Prime was about to be soaked in blood. In the Chamber of Echoes, Elena made her decision. She turned to the main console. She placed her hands on its surface. She spoke to the technology as if it were alive. Open the inner gate, she said. Show us what else you have to give. The chamber responded. The floor trembled. The walls began to shift, and behind the platform, hidden in shadows that had lasted for millions of years, a new door began to open. Golden light spilled from the opening, warm and welcoming and full of promise. The humans walked toward it. They left the chaos behind. They left the violence and the hatred and the fear. They went deeper into the temple of Vithora. They went looking for something that might save them all. Behind them, the galaxy was tearing itself apart, but ahead of them, the architects had left one more gift, one more chance for everything to change. The inner sanctum was called the heart of Thora. It was the place where the architects had stored their most precious gift, the place where they had left their final message to the universe. The humans walked through the golden light and found themselves in a chamber unlike anything they had ever seen. It was not vast like the chamber of echoes, it was intimate, personal. The walls curved inward like cupped hands. The ceiling glowed with soft warmth. The floor was covered with symbols that pulsed gently beneath their feet, and in the center of the room stood a single pillar of crystal, pure and clear and filled with dancing light. Elena approached the crystal slowly. She could feel something coming from it, not heat, not radiation, something else, something that felt like hope. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's a data core, Marcus said. He was scanning it with trembling hands. The most advanced data storage system I've ever seen. There's more information in this crystal than in all the libraries of the conquered combined. Obi was studying the symbols on the floor. They were similar to the inscriptions throughout the temple, but these were different. These were more personal, more emotional. Their letters, he said. His voice was thick with feeling, personal messages from individual architects to whoever would find this place. What do they say? Elena asked. Obi knelt down. He traced the symbols with his fingers. He read them slowly, carefully, letting their meaning sink into his heart before speaking it aloud. This one says, I hope you are not alone. We were alone for so long. Do not make our mistake. He moved to another symbol. We learned too late that knowledge without connection is empty. Fill your lives with both. Another. We were afraid of what we did not understand. That fear killed us. Be braver than we were. And another. We built this place because we loved you, even though we never met you, even though we knew we never would. Love does not require presence, only choice. Elena felt tears on her cheeks. She had not known she was crying. She looked at her team and saw the same tears on their faces. Even Yuki, even the soldier who had trained herself to feel nothing in dangerous situations. They were so lonely. Elena said they built all of this because they didn't want anyone else to feel that lonely. The crystal contains everything they knew. Marcus said he was reading the data streams with growing amazement. Science, art, philosophy, history, medicine, engineering, but also personal things. Diaries, poems, stories they told their children, songs they sang at celebrations, everything that made them who they were, not just knowledge. Obi said, CC, culture, spirit, soul. Elena reached out and touched the crystal. It was warm beneath her fingers. It seemed to pulse in response to her touch, like a heartbeat, like a welcome. Images began to flow around them, holographic projections from the crystal. They showed the architects in their daily lives, working, playing, loving, grieving. They showed a civilization at its peak, full of wonder and creativity and joy. And then the images changed. They showed decline. They showed sickness spreading through the population. They showed desperate attempts to find a cure. They showed failure after failure. They showed a species watching itself slowly disappear. We could not save ourselves, said a voice from the crystal. It was the same voice from the chamber of echoes, the same sad figure. with the gentle hands. We tried everything. In the end, we had to accept that our time was over, but we refused to let everything we had learned die. With us, the holographic figure turned to face the humans directly. Its eyes seemed to look into each of them, into their hearts, into their souls. So we planted seeds. The figure continued. We scattered the potential for life across the galaxy, and we built this place to wait for someone to find it, someone who could carry our legacy forward, someone who would remember us. Why us? Elena asked. It was the same question Yuki had asked in the outer chamber, but now it felt different. Now it felt more important because you remind us of ourselves, the figure said, when we were young, when we were full of questions, before we learned to be afraid, before we learned to close doors instead of opening them. You have something that we lost, something precious, something that cannot be taught, only preserved. What is that? Elena asked. Hope, the figure said. You have hope even in darkness, even in failure, even when everything tells you that hope is foolish. You still hope. That is why we chose you. That is why we waited for you. For 4.7 million years, the crystal pulsed brighter. More data streams began to flow. They flowed out of the crystal and into the temple systems. They flowed through circuits that had been dormant for eon. They flowed toward the outside world. What's happening? Yuki asked. Marcus was checking his scanner. His eyes went wide. The crystal is broadcasting to everything, to every system in the temple, to every ship in orbit, to every network it can reach. Broadcasting what? Everything. The entire contents of the data core. The architects are giving away their inheritance to everyone. Elena understood. She understood what the architects had wanted all along. It was never about choosing one species over another. It was never about heirs or successors. It was about making sure that no one would ever be alone the way they had been alone. It was about sharing everything they had learned so that others might grow. We're not special, she said. We were just the key, the trigger, the ones who would open the door. And now that the door is open, Obi said, everyone can walk through. Outside the temple, the chaos was reaching its peak. Fighting had spread across the courtyard. Ships in orbit were maneuvering for combat positions. High Commander Voss was leading a charge toward the temple entrance. He was determined to purge the blasphemy. He was determined to restore the sacred order. And then the sky changed. Holographic projections appeared across Mythal Prime. They appeared on every ship, on every screen, in every system connected to the conquered networks. The face of the architect appeared, the gentle figure with the sad eyes, and it spoke. It spoke in a language that every species could understand. It spoke of love and loss, of hope and fear, of the great loneliness that comes from being alone in a vast universe. And it offered a gift. This is our legacy, the architect said. Not power, not dominion, not the right to rule, just knowledge. Just everything we learned in our long existence, given freely to anyone who wants it, in the hope that you will do better than we did, in the hope that you will find each other, in the hope that you will never be as alone as we were. Data streams began to flow into every system, every database, every archive. The accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had lived for millions of years, the science that could cure diseases, the philosophy that could end conflicts, the art that could heal Hearts, all of it given away for free. High Commander Voss stopped his charge. He stared up at the holographic figure. In the sky, he saw the face of his god. Not the warrior god he had imagined. Not the conquering deity who would grant power to the worthy, just a lonely being who wanted someone to remember them. Hypat fell to his knees again, but this time he was not praying, he was weeping. Weeping with joy and sorrow mixed together, weeping because everything he had believed was wrong and everything he had hoped for was real. Ambassador Trell watched the data streams flowing into her ship systems. She saw the technology that could advance her species by centuries. She saw the knowledge that could give them unprecedented power, and she saw that every other species was receiving the same gift. No one would have an advantage. No one would be left behind. The playing field was being leveled in a way that no war could ever achieve. In the heart of Vora, the humans watched it all through the temple sensors. They saw the fighting stop. They saw the weapons lower. They saw the anger and fear slowly drain from faces. Throughout the galaxy, it worked. Alina said she could hardly believe it. They're actually stopping. Architects knew what they were doing. Obi said they knew that the only way to prevent war over the inheritance was to give it to everyone to make it impossible to hoard. Pretty smart for a bunch of extinct aliens, Marcus said. Yuki almost smiled. Almost. The holographic figure of the architect appeared before them one last time. It looked at each of them with those sad, gentle eyes, and then it spoke directly to them. Thank you, it said, for opening the door, for walking through, for being curious enough to touch what you did not understand. You have done what we hoped for. You have begun what we could not finish. What happens now? Alina asked. Now you go home, the architect said. You return to your people. You help them understand what they have received. You teach them to use it wisely, and you never forget what we learned too late. What is that? That the greatest power in the universe is not knowledge, it is connection. It is reaching out to those who are different. It is building bridges instead of walls. It is choosing love over fear every time, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. The figure began to fade. The crystal began to dim. The temple was completing its purpose. Soon it would fall silent again, but this time the silence would be different. This time the silence would be satisfied. Wait, Alina said. Will we ever see you again? Will we ever speak with you again? The figure smiled. It was a real smile this time, not sad, not lonely, just grateful. We are in every piece of knowledge we left Bay. Galaxy had changed. Everyone could feel it. In the weeks following the opening of the temple, everything was different. Not in dramatic ways, not in the explosion of violence that many had feared, but in small ways, quiet ways. The ways that matter most. The knowledge flowed like water. It found its way into every corner of the conquered. Scientists on distant worlds made breakthroughs that would have taken centuries. Doctors cured diseases that had plagued species for generations. Engineers built devices that seemed like magic. Artists created works of beauty that brought tears to the eyes of beings who had forgotten how to cry. But the changes went deeper than technology. They went to the heart of what it meant to be alive in a universe that was no longer quite so lonely. Alelina returned to Earth 3 weeks after the temple broadcast. She had expected a hero's welcome. Instead, she Found something more valuable, she found. Normally, people treated her the same as they always had. She was still Dr. Vasquez, still a xenorchaeologist, with too many degrees and not enough social skills, still the woman who forgot to eat when she was working on a project, still human. Don't you feel different? Marcus asked her one evening. They were sitting on the roof of the university where Elena worked. The stars were coming out above the city lights after everything that happened. Elena considered the question carefully. She had been asked it many times by reporters, by government officials, by her mother, who still did not quite understand what her daughter had done. I feel like myself, she said. Finally, just more so. Does that make sense? Not really. I mean, I always knew that curiosity was important, that asking questions was what made us human. But now I understand it differently. Now I know that it's not just important. It's essential. It's what the architects saw in us. It's what they hoped we would never lose. Marcus nodded slowly. He was still processing what had happened. They all were. It would take years, maybe generations. The full meaning of the inheritance was too large to grasp all at once. What happens now? He asked. For you, for all of us. Now we do what we always did. We keep asking questions. We keep reaching for answers. We keep walking through doors just to see what's on the other side. That's what they wanted. That's the best way to honor them. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. Species that had been enemies for centuries were finding common ground. The shared inheritance made them all equal in a way that treaties and alliances never could. Everyone had received the same gift. Everyone had to figure out what to do with it. High Prelate Moroth resigned from his position. He could not continue leading a faith that had been built on mysteries that were now revealed, but he did not lose his faith. He simply redirected it. He became a teacher, a guide. He helped others understand that the architects were not gods. They were just beings who had loved the universe so much that they could not bear to leave it empty. High Commander Voss was removed from his position by his own troops. His call for violence had been heard by millions. So had the voice of the architect. The contrast was too clear. The warriors of the Corvathi found a new purpose in protecting the knowledge that was now flowing freely. They became guardians not of sacred secrets but of sacred openness. Ambassador Trell returned to the Velith collective with the data from the temple. Her scientists analyzed it for months. They found technology beyond their wildest dreams. They also found the personal letters, the poems, the lullabies that architect parents had sung to their children. Trell, who had never allowed herself to feel, found herself reading those letters again and again, found herself understanding something that no equation could express. Obiadame published his translations of the architect inscriptions. They became the most widely read texts in the galaxy, not because of the technology they contained, but because of the humanity, the vulnerability, the raw honesty of beings who knew they were dying but refused to give in to despair. Yuki Tanaka returned to military service, but she requested a transfer to the diplomatic corps. She had seen what violence could almost accomplish on Mythal Prime. She wanted to make sure it never came that close again. Her combination of tactical thinking and new perspective made her one of the most effective peace negotiators in the conquered and on a human colony world. Called New Hope, a little girl named Maria sat in her school library reading about the temple of Vithora. She was 8 years old. She had brown hair that never stayed in its braids. She had a gap between her front teeth that made her smile look mischievous. She had questions about everything. Her teachers sometimes found her exhausting. Her parents sometimes found her challenging. But everyone agreed that there was something special about Maria. "Mom," she said that evening, "I want to be an archaeologist." Her mother looked up from the dinner she was preparing. She saw her daughter holding the book about the temple, holding it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Why?" her mother asked. "Because I want to find doors that no one has opened yet. I want to walk through them and see what's on the other side, like Dr. Vasquez did." Her mother smiled. It was the same smile that had appeared on millions of faces across the galaxy as the inheritance spread, the smile of hope recognized, of potential understood. "Then that's what you'll do," she said, "and I'll help you get there." Maria hugged her mother. Then she ran outside to look at the stars. She looked up at the night sky and wondered which one was Mythil Prime. She wondered what other temples might be waiting, what other doors might be sealed, what other questions might be waiting for someone to ask them. She did not know that she was exactly what the architects had hoped for. She did not know that she was the continuation of a conversation that had started millions of years ago. She only knew that she was curious, and that was enough. On Mythil Prime, the temple of Vithora stood silent. Once more, the gates remained open. There was no need to close them now. The secrets had been shared. The inheritance had been distributed. The great work was complete. But sometimes when the purple light of evening fell across the ancient stones, pilgrims would enter the temple and walk to the heart of Vithora. They would stand before the crystal that was now dark and quiet. They would close their eyes and remember. They would remember that once long ago a lonely species had loved them enough to leave everything behind. They would remember that the universe was full of doors waiting to be opened. They would remember that curiosity was the greatest gift, that wonder was the highest purpose, that reaching out to the unknown was what made life worth living. And sometimes, if they listened very carefully, they could almost hear the architects whispering, not words, not instructions, just a feeling, a warmth, a gentle encouragement. Keep asking questions, keep opening doors, keep walking through. We will be watching. We will be cheering. We will be proud. Because that was the real inheritance. Not the technology, not the knowledge, not the science or the art or the philosophy. It was permission. Permission to be curious, permission to wonder, permission to reach out and touch what you do, not understand, just to see what happens. The humans had not walked through the gates because they were special. They had walked through because they had never been told that they couldn't, because they had never learned to fear closed doors, because they had never lost the childlike wonder that the architects had recognized and loved. And now that wonder was spreading. It was infecting the galaxy. It was changing everything. One question at a time, one door at a time, one step into the unknown at a time. The architects had been gone for 4.7 million years, but in a very real way they had never been more alive, because in every child who asked why, in every scientist who asked how, in every explorer who asked what's next, the architects lived on, and they would live on forever, as long as someone somewhere was still curious enough to walk through a door, just to see what was on the other side. The end.